So with that in mind, it is now time for us to move to lightning talks because we are past 4 o'clock. And so our first lightning talk about innovative pedagogy in physical chemistry is going to be by Heidi Hendrickson at Lafayette. So Heidi, I think you are set up to do directly a screen share from your computer if you can do that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Heidi Hendrickson. I'm an assistant professor at Lafayette College. Thanks to the organizers so much for making this event possible today. This is really cool. And for also giving me the opportunity to share a brief overview of my work implementing the Compute-to-Learn pedagogy in my physical chemistry courses. Okay, so the Compute-to-Learn pedagogy is a semester-long project-based learning experience in which students collaborate within a peer-led studio environment to code Mathematica demonstrations of abstract course concepts that can be basically illuminated by dynamic computation. So during this experience, students learn key programming skills that they can apply within the context of physical chemistry. At the end of the semester, the student demonstrations undergo external peer review and they're published on the Wolfram Demonstration Project website. So during my master's work, I was involved in studying studio learning environments in physical chemistry and designing the Compute-to-Learn pedagogy. So I've also been implementing this pedagogy at Lafayette College, and we recently published a book chapter with other colleagues discussing ways to adapt the approach to work at a small liberal arts college and other types of institutions. So you can check those out if you like. The citations are there. Okay, so before we dive into the details of the implementation, I will give you a brief overview on the theoretical foundation of the Compute-to-Learn approach. It's based on the theories of situated cognition and peer learning, and it also utilizes our understanding of how students learn through activities like writing and programming. A design process is incorporated to enable students to create functional demonstrations, and the whole approach is carried out in a studio environment that's drawn from the practices that are used in the fine arts. So at Lafayette, Compute-to-Learn is implemented in a one-semester survey of physical chemistry course that covers quantum mechanics, thermodynamics, and kinetics. The weekly hour-long studio sessions are carried out as the 4th hour for the course. At Lafayette, all courses are 4 credit hours, so we have an extra hour for a typical 3-hour per week lecture courses. Students complete a tutorial on using Mathematica to create demonstrations, which provides them with the basics they need if they haven't had prior experience with Mathematica or programming for that matter. During the weekly studio sessions, students work in groups to develop their demonstrations of physical chemistry topics that are covered in general chemistry courses. So the goal at Lafayette is for the upper level students to create instructional tools for the introductory students. The demos are workshopped throughout the semester, and eventually, if all goes well, they're published on the Wolfram Demonstrations Project website at the end of the semester. So to elaborate briefly on the adaptations that I made to the original Compute-to-Learn approach, originally, the weekly studio sessions were 2 hours long, and the demo topics were related to upper-level physical chemistry course topics. At Lafayette, though, we just have a 1-hour weekly session, which limits the amount of time that the students can actually research their topic and work together to actually code the demonstrations. So to get around these issues, students make demos of the general chemistry topics for use in general chemistry courses. That way, the students are already somewhat familiar with their demo topics, and they have more time for design and coding. I've also incorporated a Mathematica tutorial instead of doing this in the studio sessions. I've incorporated it into the regular lecture for the course since we use Mathematica in other aspects of the class anyway. And this frees up some time during the studio session for design and coding. Some examples of student demonstrations are provided here. You can check them out at this website. The first demonstrates the different interaction strengths for different intermolecular forces, and the second one demonstrates the relationship between electron configuration and atomic radius. And these are just a couple examples. Currently, I'm working with 2 undergraduate students, Teresa Chua and Vidit Venkatesh, to study the effect of the Compute-to-Learn approach at Lafayette. We are looking into how using the demos in general chemistry and creating the demos in physical chemistry affects student learning and engagement in both courses. So with that, I would like to acknowledge the funding that I've received as a SOTL Scholar or Scholarship of Teaching and Learning Scholar at Lafayette to support my research and my students' research on Compute-to-Learn, and the support we've received through the Lafayette College Center for Integration of Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship. We've received a lot of support from Dr. Tracy Addy, who directs that center. And if you're interested in learning more about Compute-to-Learn, please feel free to contact me or to check out the Compute-to-Learn information that's available either on my website or also in Eitan Geva's group at the University of Michigan, where I did my PhD and master's. So thank you for your attention.
Awesome. Thanks, Heidi. Okay, the next talk is by Andrew Petit. Andrew, are you ready?
Yes.
All right.
Okay. And then let's go to this. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So I'm Andrew Petit. I'm an associate professor at California State University, Fullerton. And thank you for this opportunity to share with you stuff I've been working on for several years, using computational chemistry mini projects to engage physical chemistry students. And so before going through a specific example, let's talk about general implementation. So students in my physical chemistry lectures typically do 2 to 3 of these mini projects per semester. They're able to work on these assignments individually or in small teams of 2 to 3 students based on their own preference. And these are major assignments that are collectively worth 20 to 23% of the overall course grade. In developing these assignments, I make heavy use of online resources like online simulations, as well as IQMO, which is a free program students can download to enable them to look at the output of electronic structure calculations. And the mini projects generally emphasize visualizing key concepts in the course, developing data analysis skills, critical thinking with respect to data interpretation, right? What does it mean? Being able to follow a technical procedure, right? That's an important skill that students need in their future careers. And I really like to use authentic data from recent literature if I can. And I like to relate physical chemistry to prior courses, for example, organic chemistry. So I'm going to show you one specific example of what students do in one of the mini projects, which focuses on spectroscopy and photochemistry. So here are 2 compounds. Students visualize the normal modes using IQMO, visualize the calculated IR spectra, and try to explain, what are the vibrations that are associated with different regions of the IR spectrum? Why is this one peak so intense? Conceptual things like that. We then move on into UV vis spectroscopy and photochemistry. The students visualize the molecular orbitals associated with an electronic transition. Using electronic structure data, the students estimate the excitation energy, the fluorescence energy. They visualize what happens in excited state geometry optimization and relate that back to vibrational relaxation. And at least at a semi-classical level, try to rationalize why this particular compound has a very large Stokes shift and exhibits excited state intramolecular proton transfer. In that same mini project, the students move on to looking at even more authentic data. So for the past 3 years or so, my research group has been very interested in photobases. So these are organic compounds that are weak bases normally, but when you photoexcite them, they become transformed into strong bases. You can see that the KB increases by like 11 orders of magnitude after electronic excitation. The students visualize the molecular orbitals associated with these electronic transitions. The students are asked to follow a pretty technical procedure to take electronic structure data and use it to determine the ground state basicity strength and the excited state basicity strength. In so doing, they're confronted with things like a negative pKa, which many of them have never imagined before. So this project is using authentic data that was previously published in a research paper from my lab. It reinforces stuff that students have seen in prior classes, like acid-base theory, thermodynamics, right? So they use the thermodynamic cycle in order to do all of this analysis in a calibration curve. And again, we're using authentic data. So hopefully that gives you sort of a general sense on what students in my PChem classes do in these computational mini projects. And I'd be happy to answer questions in chat, or you can contact me. My email address is here. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Hi, everyone. I am Gail Blaustein. I am an associate professor and chair of the department here at Benedictine College, located in Hendrickson, Kansas. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of my classroom practices, I am very impressed with what I've seen so far. It makes me wonder, did I not do this right? I don't know, but this is just a completely different way of going about, I guess, answering the question, how can we communicate and teach physical chemistry effectively? So I was thinking about what I did in the classroom, and I just wanted to share with you some of the things that I have done to help my students. Well, there are some challenges to, I have to deal with this window here, I'm sorry. It's kind of blocking stuff. Okay, I have, there are some real challenges in the classroom. And here are some, just two major points. Course preparedness. In our school, the highest level of math that is required is Calc 2. And as you know, we deal with DiffEQ a lot and other types of math topics. There is very little real world math application practice in their math studies, right? It's mostly X, Y, and Z. The chemical engineering majors are okay with the math, they embrace it. The chemistry, biochemistry majors are a little more, they're a little more math shy. And not all of the math that we use in PChem courses is taught in these prereqs. So that's something to deal with. Also, homework attitude. Now, when courses are challenging and they require a lot of deep thought in order to complete assignments correctly, they're often put on the back burner by the students. And by putting them on the back burner, like if I were to assign weekly assignments that are due on Friday or due on Monday, what happens, they save them until the 11th hour, and then they don't remember anything from the beginning of the week, and it stresses them out, and they're just copying off of each other, and there's no real thought going into it. That's my own personal experience, but maybe it's different in other places anyway. And of course, when you're operating like that, it causes a lot of stress and anxiety for the students. So these were two main topics I wanted to address in my teaching strategies in the classroom. So here are my solutions. I assign homework problems after every class meeting that are directly relevant to what has been taught in the class on that day in the lesson. What that results in is a reasonable homework load. Yeah, sometimes, it gets a little lengthy. Sometimes they don't have homework. And it keeps the students on top of the course material. They are ready for the next lesson during the next class meeting. They can use the student manual, the student solutions manual if needed. It's kind of a low stakes, low pressure kind of situation. And then when I receive them, I check for completion, and I encourage neatness by awarding a bonus point. And at the beginning of every class, we have a reading quiz that kind of incentivizes them to read, even if they don't understand absolutely everything. At least they had a first pass through the material. Also, I assign pre-class assignments that I call PCAs that are due from time to time as well, just-in-time approach to the math topics that are needed to understand the next lesson. So I'm moving the background instruction out of the classroom, and I can focus my classroom time on actually teaching PChem material. And I do this by having students watch videos and fill out worksheets that I provide to them on Blackboard, our learning LMS, that's the LMS that we use. So, and then I have exams, two-part 2-hour exams. I have a concept section where it's closed book, closed notes, forcing them to make sure they understand the concepts, so they study those well. And then a problem section, open book, open notes, and so they've got everything that they need in all that stuff. And then, of course, at the end of the course, I use the ACS Form 2006 Chemistry Combined Semester Final Exam, PChem 1, Thermodynamics and Kinetics, PChem 2, Quantum Mechanics and Statistical Mechanics. So the results from my the way I do my course is that overall, over these past several years, they have been scoring in above the 50 percentile. Sometimes they had better years than others. It all depends on the students that I have, and being that we have such a small sample size year to year, being that we're such a small school, there's a lot of fluctuation. What the students had to say is that when they, some of the top students that we have went onto REUs and internships where they were working with peers from other colleges and universities, and they found that they were very highly complimented on their knowledge of PChem, on their knowledge of concepts. They were confident in being able to employ that in their REUs, and also they also enjoyed the classes. They felt like that they prepared them very well for their futures in graduate school and whatever the jobs they took after they graduated. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your attention, and thank you for this opportunity to share what I do in the classroom with you.
All right, so thank you very much to the organizers also for allowing me to share some of my thoughts here. Or I'm going to approach this from a slightly different side, which is thinking about assessment. So I'm at Fresno State in Central California. We're a public university. And since this is a very short talk, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. My email's here and it will be again at the end. So why does our assessment matter? Well, what are we really thinking about when we want to assess students? And a lot of my thoughts here were developed by this Shinsky and Tanner paper, which I highly recommend if you are interested in sort of rethinking how you use assessment and specifically thinking about assessment as a tool for learning rather than just evaluating what students have learned, but using it as a tool in and of itself. So the way that I have gone about this is using basically mastery-based grading, where you develop a clear list of objectives and specifications for the students. I've done this in multiple classes at this point, but basically there's no guesswork. This system really takes the guesswork out of what students need to learn. They're told what they need to learn. And then the assessment is really all about, did they learn the material? It's not how many points they can get. Can they game the system enough to get 50% of the points or whatever they need to kind of get a C in the class? It's really, did they learn the topics? And the thing that really sold me on this was actually one of my students came in and said that it was frustrating not to know what score they had on Canvas, but they're just going to have to focus on learning the material. And my response to that was, oh, I'm sorry, you're going to have to learn. But yeah, it changes the focus of the class. And it's about eventual mastery of various topics rather than just sort of evaluating them at a single point in time. So I'm going to show you how I applied this to my quantum chemistry course. So this is my breakdown for the final letter grades. And basically there's 3 components to their grade. There's some quizzes, which are implemented on Canvas. They have multiple attempts for those. And I set some bar, which was 8 out of 10 as a satisfactory score. So they need to get a certain number of satisfactory quizzes. So this becomes really a chunk of grading rather than, which is why I refer to it as quantized grading, rather than sort of a continuous scale of points. And then they have homework assignments, and the homework assignments are also graded pretty coarsely for completion and correctness, although correctness is variable depending on the specific assignment. And generally they either get 0, 1/2, or 1 points. So it's a course scale there as well. And then the exams are based on the number of objectives that they pass by the end of the semester. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the exams on the next slide. But basically, I have divided my course into 16 objectives. These are the objectives for exam 1 that I used. Each objective is graded as S, S-, or U. So again, no points here. It's just, did they get the topic? It doesn't have to be perfect. To get a satisfactory score, generally there's 4 sort of subparts for each topic, and they need to get 3 out of 4 to get a satisfactory score on the in-class version. If they don't quite reach that point, but it's obvious that they kind of know what they're talking about, they might just need some more time outside of an exam setting, they have a chance to revise and resubmit. That's the S- grade. And if they really have not shown me that they know what they're talking about, then they get another opportunity on the final to revise each of the objectives. So this is just one example. And this has really allowed students to kind of, using a structure along these lines, I've used lots of variations. On my last slide, I will have some resources for you, but in this particular iteration, I've had students tell me that it really allows them to learn from their mistakes. So it's not just about the in-class exam, although that is a component of it, but it's about, do they actually learn the topics and can they revisit those? And so with that, I would like to acknowledge 2 of my colleagues who have been very helpful, Morgan Hawker and Hubert Mohalski, in getting me started in this direction, and my department for being supportive of me throwing points out of my classes. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions by email or in the chat. And I have a couple of resources here. The chemistry repository has a few PChem classes, but if anybody else is doing interesting things, I'm the one that runs it. So I'm happy to share, or I'm happy to post more syllabi if you have some fun syllabi. So thank you very much.
Awesome, Kristi. Next up, we have Kelly.
Okay, good. My name is Kelly Theisen. I'm at the State University of New York at Plattsburgh, and you can see my email and Twitter on the bottom if you'd like to contact me with either of those formats. So today I'm going to talk about how I reorganized my exams to have higher Bloom's level questions. So a lot of times for exams, we focus on just recall type questions or explaining concepts, and that has its place. Of course, we don't want to get rid of that entirely, but my goal was to try to move the exams more towards the top of the Bloom's pyramid. So there's a couple of benefits for this. One is improved student learning and retention, right? We know this as the whole point of the Bloom's taxonomy. Removing time limits from exams improves accessibility. It also decreases student anxiety. It's easier to enforce academic integrity for this type of an exam online. And that's one of the things I was dealing with the pandemic. We didn't have a way to do anything in class. Also, I've found that grading is far less tedious, and I'll show you why for some of these questions. So that's a nice bonus for me as well. All right, so here's a couple examples of these different questions that I have now. One is a create, so the very top of the Bloom's pyramid, and the other is apply and analyze, which is sort of towards the middle. So every exam that the students take will have one of each of these types of questions plus some others. The creative question, they basically have to take a set of things that they've learned, combine them all together and tell a coherent story in whatever format they choose. So in this particular question, it's about the thermodynamics of protein folding or unfolding. So they can write a description if they want to go old school. They can do a blog post or a podcast or a poem or a song. I don't care, whatever format they want that is helpful to them to explain this material. I've gotten some really great stuff from this. It's awesome. I love grading this question. The second one is analyzing a research paper. So in this particular example, we were studying DSC, the scanning calorimetry. And so they had to find a paper that uses this technique. And then I asked them a series of questions that they use that research paper to answer based on their class knowledge. So now they're not going to understand necessarily all of the paper, but they should understand the part that covers the technique we studied in class. And this allows me to assign each student their own paper, so they can't cheat off another person. Even if they work together, they still have to have their own individual result. So that's all fine. And then the creative one obviously has to be completely unique because it's really easy to tell if somebody submits the same poem twice, right? You know exactly what happened there. Here's some student feedback on these. This has overall been really well received by my students. You have to give them some guidance, and I use point values. I took it off for the presentation, but there's point values assigned to each part. So I very clearly lay out what they're expected to do. But they like that this is the alternative. They like the removal of the time constraint with the feedback. And they like that they can creatively express their knowledge, right? So some of them don't feel like they express themselves best in terms of writing. And so this gives them another way to show what they know to me. Okay, so I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak and my students for test driving this new exam format and my department and my university. So I'm happy to take questions in the chat or by email, whichever is easier.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. So I want to start with my general idea about how to teach PCAM. You know this sticker that I think it's an ACS bumper sticker that says honk if you pass PCAM. So one thing that I do for my students, and I said, forget the sticker, instead let's use this one, I love PCAM. And one thing that I tell them is that I don't want them just to do the dishes, I want them to want to do the dishes. So what are some strategies that I use to help me lower the activation barrier for success in teaching undergraduate PCAM? I use a lot of humor. I put it here at the end, but I hope you already saw that. And it's one of my ways to increase their confidence. We talk about the challenges and how students find this intimidating and scary. So if we joke a lot, it helps them relax and it helps them achieve much higher results. So strategies that helped me was do a pre-test for algebra and calculus skills, encourage students to ride their own bicycles. I'll explain a little bit more about that. Use everyday life references, connect with experiment, provoke critical thinking, and as I already told you, have a lot of fun. So the pre-test for algebra and calculus, it's because as we already talked a lot about this, we have constraints from prerequisites, enrollment. We cannot require Calc 3. I taught PCAM in 2 institutions, neither of them required Calc 3. As you know, we need Calc 3 in order to teach PCAM. I've also noticed that a lot of algebra skills are missing. And so what I do is I give them a pre-test, which is actually on the syllabus day. And it's separated into 3 sections, a must know, good to know, and above expectations. So, and then I give them feedback that if they're missing something from the must know, then they need to take care of this. If there's something from the good to know section, then I do a quick review of this. And then for the above expectations, I cover this math skill at the beginning of the semester, but I teach it with specific application to PCAM, which allows me to save a lot of time. I also talk constantly about humor and critical thinking. So one thing that I tell them is I use the sticker that think this machine, that your calculator has no brain, you need to use your own. So I give them some questions like the ones that I show you here in order to provoke them thinking. Like I had a student that, because I didn't allow them to use calculators, and the student said, well, how am I supposed to calculate 1 over infinity without a calculator? And I was like, well, how are you supposed to calculate it with a calculator? So anyway, things like that. Encourage students to do it themselves, so they ride their own bicycles. This is not my own idea. I read it in my first PCAM textbook, that learning to solve PCAM problems is like riding a bicycle, and you cannot learn how to ride a bicycle by simply watching a YouTube video about it, even though, as we know nowadays, people learn a lot from YouTube videos, but I think PCAM is not one of them. So what I tell them is that they need to do it themselves. So I don't lecture a lot. I mean, I give them the concept and the idea and the goal, and then I ask them to do a lot by themselves. And I tell them that I serve as their safety wheels, the same way that they had safety wheels when they were 5 and learning how to ride the bicycle. And I think this serves as a huge confidence builder. I had feedback from multiple students that they're just not good in math, they cannot do that. And I was like, yes, you can. And then eventually, yes, they can. We also talk as one of the challenges for PCAM in my group, we talk about perceived applicability of PCAM, and we cannot motivate students. Why do we need that? So they are like, Dr. Bobadova, why do we do that? And I say, well, to make you suffer, it's one goal, or maybe there is more to it. So even when I just talk about derivatives, and I say that, I tell them that behind this, every of this one derivatives, there is an experiment. So dV/dt at constant p, that's an experiment. And we talk about what is the experiment that connects to that. So in exams, sometimes give them a description of the experiment, and I say, now translate it into mathematics. Another thing that was a lot of fun is we derived the thermodynamic properties of different processes like isochoric, isobaric, adiabatic. And then the following week, I went with them in the lab and I gave them fire extinguishers and pillowcases, and I asked them to use the fire extinguisher inside the pillowcase. And then after the experiments, I tell them, now show to me mathematically why did the CO2 freeze or deposit, if we need to be exact. And for many of them, this was a huge aha moment that what we were doing, what we did last week on the blackboard is related to this dry ice. And last, I want to finish with something that I hope you find funny. I'm originally from Bulgaria, so I found this post in my feedback from a Bulgarian friend. It's written in Bulgarian, so I apologize, but that's the exact picture. And then I translated it to students and asked them to analyze it. So when I was preparing the slides for this talk, I Googled it and I found that this translation is now on Czech. So I wonder whether it came from me or it's another person at a PChem instructor is using similar ideas. So this post basically tells you, and using formulas and things that sound very scientific, but they're not, that instead of working out, you can just drink cold beer, and then the cold beer, because your body needs to use energy to warm the beer up, then actually use more energy to warm the beer than the calories that you gain from the beer. So what I do is I separate my students into groups and I challenge them to find as many wrong things as possible in the statement. And for anything that I find wrong and it's legit, I give them points. And then the group that finds the most wrong things, I give them 10 bonus points. So I hope I made you laugh with that. And thank you very much for the opportunity. It was awesome to be here.
Great. Thank you, Petia. Dom, do you want to give it a try again?
Absolutely. All right. Can everybody else see my slides?
Looks good.
All right, wonderful. So today, I just wanted to tell you about an exercise that I developed this semester. This is my first semester as a prof, and so necessity was the mother of invention in this case. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about this exercise. So I'm at a private liberal arts institution in Amherst, New York, which is in the Buffalo metro. We're pretty small, and our main focus as a university is the health sciences and allied health sciences. But we have a unified natural sciences department in which there's about 200 students, 52 of which are biochemists. We don't have a chemistry major, but we have a bunch of biochemists, as you can see, but they're only required to take one semester's worth of PChem. And my predecessor taught the course as an introduction to physical chemistry, which was only thermodynamics and nothing else. And it was a ponderous go through basic thermodynamics, and there was a lot of derivation, and all of the biochemists hated it. And so what I decided to do this semester was develop a new course in biophysical chemistry, which covered introductory topics in thermo and kinetics and quantum mechanics. And that makes me happy because I'm an electronic structure theorist by training, so I didn't have to never teach my topic again for the rest of my career. But the point of entry for many of the students in this class and many of our students in general is, whoops, let me go back for a second, is that in order to go into thermodynamics, we need to explore concepts of heat and work. And heat is something that chemists and biochemists have a fairly good intuition for. It's not something that is very mysterious, but work is not something that they are necessarily used to considering. And so thinking about the inequities in applied forces externally to a system is not something that they're used to doing. And so many of us who teach in the physical chemistry sequence use pressure volume work as kind of the introduction to how to think about work as a chemist, because chemists are pretty good at imagining what the behavior of gases is after general chemistry. And so we can kind of use PV work to introduce the concepts of work itself to our students. Now, the only problem with this in my very, very limited experience is that we couldn't actually do a physical laboratory experiment to complement our discussion in lecture. And the reason is not because the apparati do not exist. Of course, you can buy them from Flynn for about $100, or you can get a Vernier gas pressure kit for about the same price, but we did not have any. And by the time that we kind of reached that point in the semester where I wanted to start introducing this stuff, I realized that I did not have time to order the apparatus and get it here in time. So instead, what I decided to do is use a remote and asynchronous friendly alternative, which is an ideal gas simulation through the PhET simulation service that's out of the University of Colorado. Basically what this does is it allows the students to play around with the different properties of an ideal gas and perform manipulations and changes of state on it. And what they've done in this laboratory exercise that I helped develop was perform expansions and compressions of that ideal gas in several different steps. Here you're seeing actual student data for experiments of expansion or compression in 2 steps of that ideal gas, and then in 10 steps of that same ideal gas. And what they did was, through some guided inquiry, and this is why it's POGIL-Inspired, it's not quite POGIL fully, but through some POGIL-inspired prompts of guided inquiry, they can derive the reversibility conditions for what makes a reversible expansion or compression of that ideal gas. And I've just given some example questions that I posed. So like, how does the total number of work, or how does the total work of compression vary with the number of steps? And could you estimate what the total work would be in an infinite number of steps? And how could you define concepts of efficiency? And so what I then had them do is I wrote up a bit of a guiding document to guide their writing of a publication style laboratory report instead of just the standard formal lab report that many of my colleagues and I was familiar with, at least in my undergraduate studies, and had my students prepare publication style reports on this topic for deriving the reversibility conditions as if they were performing original scientific research, because essentially they were. I have never seen anyone else use a PhET simulation this way. And so I'm hoping that my post-semester literature search would allow us to then write this up for publication, because I think it's kind of cool. So just to conclude really quickly, our biophysical chemistry students like to be able to visualize things and like to be able to get their hands on things. And they were able to do that both remotely and asynchronously using this simulated ideal gas. So thank you very, very much to all of my students in PChem that were co-experimenters with me in developing this lab, and then my department and university and the organizers and everyone attending LABSIP. So thank you very, very much. And I will be happy to answer any questions by email or chat or Twitter or anything.
Thank you, Dom. We have 3 more flash talks and then we'll wrap up. So we'll try to be out of here by 5 o'clock or so. Jonathan, do you want to go ahead?
Is my unmute worked? It looks like it. Okay, so yes, just share this. So there is my title. What I'm going to do is a little different. I've developed some tools that I've been using to help me teach PChem, and I wanted to quickly introduce them and let people know about them. And if you find them useful, great. If you don't use them. If you have ideas, please tell them to me. So there are basically, let's see, my cursor doesn't show up, does it? So where is here it is. This thing. So there are 3 different things I'm going to very briefly talk about. Algebra with SymPy is essentially a calculator for doing algebra. May help a little bit with your math averse students, or the ones who get hung up on the minus sign details. Pandas GUI is a tool to help you use column your data for analysis using Python, and Jupyter Physical Science Lab is essentially an integrated electronic laboratory notebook that you can collect data into. That's all open source. So I do have a slide so that I can share this later, but I'm going to try to show you a live version of Algebra with SymPy. So here is a Jupyter notebook. If you aren't familiar with them, but I think most people are, you've got code cells and the output. So if I start here and load the tool, you can do things like have your students define an equation. I've just typed in already the van der Waals equation. It's like typing calculator ease, but it's also starting to teach them some coding. And then it'll give you a nice form of it. And then they can do algebra the way they use a calculator to do math. They say, oh, I want to isolate P. Well, I got to divide by V minus Bn. So we do that here, the van der Waals equation divided by, you just run it and it does all the work. So they don't get tripped up on those mistakes. You do a second step, right? I remove that, move that to the other side, and you get the isolated one. The really neat thing about using this that I find is I can force my students to put their units in and I can see what they've done. You can just substitute in numbers with units and do the final calculation, whereas they would write an equation and then type something to the calculator and I wouldn't know what they did. So I find this very useful for actually seeing what kinds of mistakes the students are making. And I just did real quickly here, put in the ideal gas law for the comparison, you get different results. Let me go back to my slide here. So this is just a summary of that. The other tool was Jupyter Pandas GUI. I'm not going to actually demonstrate it, but it also runs inside a notebook. You take these columns of data, which you could get from hand input, from data acquisition, whatever, and you can analyze them. This, of course, involves coding, even if you're using a data analysis package. So what I've done is built some simple GUIs that sort of write the pieces of code for them. So if, say, you want to calculate a new column, and once they get better at it, they often do it themselves, but it generates the code and then generates the output, nice plots, things like that. And as I've said, there's a calculate, at this point, calculate new columns, making scatter line plots, and fitting. And those are the fitting things I have automatic. Now I'm working on adding extra. Both of the tools I've just shown you are integrated into the Jupyter Physical Science Lab, which is essentially an electronic laboratory notebook. That has menus for launching these various tools. I'm just going to highlight here what they get if they insert a new run where they can literally collect data from sensors right into the notebook. They get a table to fill out, decide what sensors you want and units and so on. This is a simple Gen Chem calorimetry experiment with coffee cup calorimeters, temperature versus time. It uses the Raspberry Pi in this case. With some work, it could be used on other machines as well. The other thing probably of use to you is I've also got some instructor tools for locking cells and highlighting things permanently and things like that. So I'm going to stop right there and just put up my final slide, which is really my first slide with links again.
So I'm going to talk about trying to trigger the motivation of our students. You know, we have a lot of students coming into PChem, but they don't all want to go into PChem. And so the question is, how can we trigger what I sometimes think of as their intrinsic motivation? So I'm sure this has been said many times, is that one of the fundamental problems is that our chem students get to PChem, or a variety of different students, like Dom said, the biochem students get to PChem, they're often overwhelmed by math, and they say, geez, if I wanted to do this much math, I would have been a math major. And so one possible solution, in addition to providing all the help that we do, is to provide a trigger or intrinsic motivation for them to learn the theory. And to summarize, I used to jump up and down for 39 lectures trying to exude my enthusiasm for PChem, getting them to love PChem. Now I ask a different question. I ask them, well, what is it that you love? And I try to teach them how to love it better with PChem. And so what I do is I actually launch PChem 1. So this is the first day of their first PChem course. And I say, okay, we're going to do a project. I haven't taught them any of the theory yet. We're going to do a project. We launch the quantum course, which is we do quantum first with a student designed team project. Now, before I tell you about that, I want to tell you the psychology theory of why it is that I'm doing this. And it's called self-determination theory by Ryan and Deci. And what they have found, and this dates back to 1985, is that not only students, but athletes and people in the workforce, just basically human beings, are able to be their best when they have 3 socio-emotional needs that are met. And they are feeling competent, like they can do stuff, feeling relatedness, like they belong, and feeling autonomous, like they're free to make decisions that are important to them. And when they have all 3, that triggers their intrinsic motivation. And I think we all know that a common motivation is students want to do well in the class. They want to get a good grade. That's an extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is a totally different world. So what I've tried to build into my PChem 1 class are course elements that map onto those. So what they end up doing is they gain competence in using quantum chemistry software, and also in designing a study. They're engaged in teamwork from day one. And this whole thing about, hey, class, form teams and think of a project that you want to work on. We're going to work on that. You're going to basically learn how to drive the car of quantum theory. That's a little, it's a tiny bit shocking. And there's a sense that the class is in it, together. And finally, the autonomy comes from the fact that students are designing studies that are meaningful to them. So, I'll tell you a bit later about some of the qualitative information that we get. So here's what I'm going to show you is basically how I do this in my PChem 1 course. I basically have a sandwich, and the bread of the course is like a pre-post. So we start with a project, and we don't have a final exam. We end with a project. And then in the middle, we have sort of what you might consider normal stuff, lectures, problem sets, exams. But I'm going to go back to this. And a really important thing that we do after the project is we have a reflection. And I ask the students, well, what did you learn? And they go through and they have a process about thinking about what they learned and writing it down. And then what did you wish you had learned? And in the process of what they wish they learned, oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes they want to know how the car works, what's inside the box. And in the process, what we do is we co-create the curriculum for the course. And then that almost always involves an intro, some base case systems, and then application to the stuff that they studied using the quantum chemistry software. The other thing that we do is we reflect after each, to get ready for each exam. And as we reflect, we think, well, what did we learn in this unit and what should come next? So there's a constant sense of co-creating the curriculum. Now, in the end, we scramble teams. They can pick the same topic, they can pick a different topic. And then there's now 2 reflections. One is they have to think about, well, what are the core concepts in the course that they are using for this project? And then that's a team kind of reflection. And then the individual reflection for each student. Did I reach my goals? And the classic one, if I had to do it over again, what would I do differently? So the key idea is that we have a sandwich here, and the bread are these sort of pre-post computational chemistry projects that help, I think, to trigger the motivation of students. And what we've seen is from some of the qualitative data that we've collected is that students like the balance of the constrained outcomes in the course, where there's a set of concepts that they all learn, and unconstrained outcomes in the course, where different students are learning different things and they're free to choose those things. So finally, I want to paint a picture of learning PChem as like learning about a car. The first time you got into a car, did you open up the hood and take apart the engine? No, probably not. You learned to drive the car, and you learned to drive it to a place that was meaningful to you, which was probably the mall. And then maybe step 2 is you learned how to fix the car, fill it up with gas, or fix a flat tire. And finally, maybe you learned how to build a car, soup up the engine. So I suggest that this is maybe the way we should be teaching PChem. Give students a chance to drive PChem where they would like to go. So thank you so much for the chance to share this.
So hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Nash. I am a software scientist at the Molecular Sciences Software Institute. I'm the education lead there, and I also I don't teach physical chemistry, but I do teach a class at Berkeley on programming for chemists. So I'm excited to be here today to share some information with you about the Molecular Sciences Software Institute, some resources that we have, some upcoming initiatives, and some ways that you can connect to us. So the Molecular Sciences Software Institute is an NSF-funded institute that's based at Virginia Tech. We are designed to serve and enhance software development efforts in computational molecular sciences. So we focus on computational molecular sciences, which has a lot of connections to physical chemistry. We've been around since 2016 with our funding renewed for an additional 5 years in 2021. We do a lot of software development in computational molecular science, but we also have quite a large education program. So for MOLSI education, which I lead at the Institute, we have a number of live workshops that students can attend each year. Since 2017, we've had over 2,000 students attend our synchronous workshops. Our curriculum is languages and tools used by software developers and data scientists in the context of computational molecular science. And we look to engage really a broad audience that is both global and diverse with our efforts. I think relevant to this conversation are our efforts in faculty and curriculum development, which is led by Ashley McDonald, who is a professor at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which many of you may be familiar with. She is our co-director for faculty training and education. So when we're looking at doing faculty and curriculum development with MOLSI, we want to enable faculty to use programming and computation in their classrooms. So far, we've done this through a number of ways. So we sponsored a workshop, or we held a workshop and a symposium at the Biennial Conference on Chemical Education last summer, which I'm seeing many familiar faces from. MOLSI is also sponsoring 2 workshops in the spring with the group Enhancing Science Courses by Integrating Python. And we also, Ashley and I edited the ACS Symposium Series book, Teaching Programming Across the Chemistry Curriculum, which I've seen some people who have chapters in that in this meeting. But that book is a good resource that highlights programming in different chemistry classes, some of which are PChem. So when we're doing our faculty and curriculum development, we're looking at really focusing on using programming to enhance scientific concepts within courses. So that being said, now I want to tell you about a few upcoming efforts that MOLSI is working on. So one of the things to look out for in the spring is we are working on writing an article in the Living Journal of Computational Molecular Science on learning communities within the molecular sciences, so learning communities and curricular resources. We'll be reaching out to those communities soon. These are some of the ones that we've identified. Of course, we'd be happy if you have any that we've missed. You can let us know. And we're aiming to recruit people from those learning communities to contribute to this review. We're also planning in the spring to launch a community education hub, which this will be a website with a centralized place for sharing learning resources related to computational molecular science. We want this to accompany the live comms article and link out to different learning resources, and this can be for computational molecular science research or computational resource programming and computational resources that can be used in classes. So more information, this is a heads up that this is coming. And it's likely going to be hosted on GitHub and open for contribution. So those are things that are coming up that I thought would be particularly relevant. We also, in our existing resources, have a workshop on Python scripting for computational molecular science that answers the questions of how do I get started with Python. It introduces Python programming with examples relevant to chemistry. There's also a version for biochemists. This is available on the MOLSI website, which I will mention in just a minute. We recommend using cloud resources. I can send these slides out because I know that I am running out of time. But if you want to find existing MOLSI education resources online, you can go to education.molsi.org and then click on this resources tab. And then you can see the existing tutorials that MOLSI has. So for example, we have that Python data and scripting workshop. Okay. And that is it. We hope that you're excited about the things that we're doing, and we hope that we can interact with many of you for these upcoming efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you to you all for participating and presenting today. Obviously, this couldn't have been as exciting and successful as an event without you. So I'm just going to wrap up because Casey had to head out. But I want to tell you about a couple of upcoming events. Hopefully you can see my screen. So number one, we have an innovative teaching in physical chemistry symposium going on at the ACS meeting in Indianapolis on March 2023. So all of you are invited to submit oral presentations. I know many of you have already. If you haven't, please feel free to attend. Many of us will be there. So Jessica was mentioning Ashley, another number of other people on this call and who are part of the LABSIP community will also be there. So please attend. Related to this, next steps for what we're doing. So what we're going to do after this is we're going to gather all of your materials. We really appreciate everything that you've contributed from presentations to ideas. For the presentations, we're going to share those all. For the ideas, we're going to start going through all those different ideas. And if you didn't get a chance to up or downvote different parts of the physical chemistry curriculum, please do that on all of our ideas. And we're going to do some analysis of the things that physical chemists really think are important, the things that we think that we need to change, and what resources you all need. And we're going to post those things to a website, and we're going to start developing workshops around those. So the first workshop that we know that we will absolutely be planning is in July 2023. This is going to be sponsored by Gutow. And it's going to take place in Tucson, Arizona. So if you're super interested in continuing this conversation in person, please be on the lookout for this. How should you be on the lookout? So after this meeting, we're going to send out a survey. And if you're interested, please submit your contact information. We will share some of that contact information with everybody who's here today, if you approve of that. Otherwise, we'll add you to our listserv and keep all of you involved in this conversation. So I want you to think about this as sort of a living kind of collaborative. We really do want everybody to be involved. We're just willing to do all the footwork. So with that, thank you all for attending today. We really appreciate it. Please share and please continue the conversation moving forward.